So my name is Leonie Tanczer. I'm a lecturer at UCL. And I think I'm here to basically get your toenails rolled, as was basically alluded to earlier. I'm working on a topic that is very close to my heart, which is on the topic of domestic violence and abuse, or intimate partner violence, and how that relates to technology. What I want to say is also that today is actually a really important marker, because yesterday was the International Day Against the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls. This day is celebrated for decades, but not much has changed, which is incredibly unfortunate. And I also want to state, by stating the facts around domestic violence and abuse, it still affects primarily women and girls. The UN statistics show that 137 women across the world are killed every day by a partner. And an emerging threat that I want to share with you today is that massive increase in how technology is facilitated in domestic violence and abuse cases. Now you're going to think, why has this woman been invited to this specific talk, to give this specific talk? And what has got that to do with you and your industry and the devices that you produce? Well, I want to start with saying we have predefined ideas of what perpetrators and criminal looks like. It is never our neighbor. It is never the professor that is esteemed and has all these speaking opportunities. And it's never necessarily the person that sits next to you, but it is. And also, we have predefined ideas of what abuse looks like. We think about battered women, we think about bruises, but we don't necessarily think about emotional abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, that is so prevalent and actually coming in a whole package together. And last but not least, at least with the support sector that I work with, they have predefined ideas of what technologies are used when it comes to domestic violence and abuse. They are primarily thinking, because they've seen it for the last 10, 20 years, that it's smartphones, that it's the browser. But they have not thought about all the emerging technologies that are on the horizon and already starting to be used in abuse cases. Just to give you some stats, because that's what academics do. So for example, 79% of Australian caseworkers said in that survey, actually 2014, so that's quite a long time ago, that technology plays a massive role in their day-to-day practice. Also, a Refuge, which is a charity in the UK, has increasingly seen a rise in technology being abused in domestic abuse cases. And online harassment, especially from ex-partners, is something that has haunted us for decades. Now, there's a body of literature on tech abuse research, and that's where I'm starting off with the research on how IoT is transforming technology-facilitated abuse. But in the past, we've primarily focused on online harassment, cyber stalking, or cyber-enabled stalking, so being able to follow and track a person without even being physically co-located. Spyware, which is an absolutely appalling industry, which is often advertised for parental control or monitoring of workers, but then abused to stalk the partner and have a keylogger installed on their smartphone. And then the really big topic that is recently being discussed around image-based abuse. Some of you might have heard about this controversial topic, revenge porn, but basically it means you might send a photograph to a partner of yours and think that stares between the two of you, but then the relationship potentially breaks up, or just it might be a really nasty person and they upload it to YouPorn. The commonality across all that research and everything I said is that it is a misuse and a repurposing of technology. The funniest comment I've heard, and I hope the vendor is not in the room, was that we never designed this system to be abused. And I fully understand that, but I think there's a certain responsibility to think about who could misuse that and how. Also, the research primarily focuses on conventional technologies, so we have not looked ahead of what's on the horizon. And also, it primarily affects women and BAME, so Black, Asian, minority, ethnic groups. And there's an active commitment to this very day that is required from the perpetrator. And what I mean with that is, nowadays, I still need to log online and install the spyware on her phone. Nowadays, I still need to check the browser history of my partner. But what we see with IoT is that it doesn't require this active commitment, because by default, IoT systems assume trust in an environment which is shared. So as technology is changing, I think we need to, and the Internet of Things is one of the core technologies in this space. We need to think about what aspects of IoT could be abused, in what sense, and aspects that we have identified as potential risks for victims and survivors would be, for example, the voice control, that you don't need to be physically in the house, but also, for example, the audio recording, which means that I can ask my Alexa and get a prompt to basically know where the closest refuge is without knowing that my partner has access to basically the app where it says that I have asked that question. The data collection, but especially the shared accounts. It's relatively, we've moved away from a personal computer or personal device environment to a shared device environment. And in an abusive relationship, there's power imbalances. So one person, and that's primarily the man, is in charge of purchasing, maintaining, and also disposing of that system. So often women are in the position, and I do refer always to women because statistically domestic abuse still affects primarily women, unfortunately, are not in the position to change settings or even know what's going on. So there's a lot of risk, uncertainties, and of course opportunities. I do not want to disregard them. We've heard a lot from victims and survivors that there is an avenue for IoT to be helpful, but we need to focus on the stages of abuse that are happening. With abuse, while you cohabit with a person in an environment, requires, often women not being in charge of devices, but once they separated from a partner and try to rebuild their life, they want to have authority over the environment and often use IoT systems to, for example, have control over who accesses my flat, who accesses who rings the doorbell, etc. So we are looking at something which we refer to as something like, well, we don't call it like that, but this move towards smart abuse and what it would encompass. And if you have never, ever watched Demon Seed, I highly recommend it for your weekend to-watch list. Demon Seed is a film from 1977, and I think it could not have predicted more accurately what the smart home could look like for an intimate partner relationship. And we also try to communicate the risks that would be there. And I really understand that nobody in this room designed system on the premise and the foundation that it could be abused. But we want to also communicate when it happens, what victims could do and how they could respond. And actually, if you would like to, I have those flyers with me so you could take them home. So what are the risks that you might want to have on your level of awareness? One is these systems are disguised. So for example, a smart kettle doesn't necessarily look like a different one. Or a lock still has the same function as a lock. But also they have enhanced functionalities, which is a real big risk for victims and survivors. And they expand and exacerbate the reach of perpetrator. That means I do no longer need to co-live with a person, but it's enough, and this is an example I always give, to have a one-night stand, and you talked about router security. I don't have two different passwords on my router system. Give this person my password, and within a 30-meter range, they could, for some really poor smart light bulbs, still control the lighting, while I never have a clue why they could do that. But I personally want to state one important factor. There's two worries I have at this moment of time, which is the underestimation of what IoT systems can do, but also the overestimation. We have heard from support workers asking us what this black thing can do that runs around in a house. What is it? A Roomba. So the perpetrator basically had all the opportunities to tell that victim that it had knives, that it had cameras, etc. But if you're in a coercive environment, you are scared to Google that. You just believe it often. So overestimation and underestimation can both be exploited by perpetrators. Now, a big problem we are facing is there's a lack of data because currently neither the police nor the support services actually deliberately categorize technology-facilitated abuse, so we don't know the full extent and scale of IoT in this big, broad category of tech abuse. But we are trying desperately to work on that. And I'm trying to do that together with a team of fantastic colleagues. And what we're doing is what I would say action research. So we're not the type of people that go into the lab, test something, publish an academic paper, and say that's us done. But actually, we try to work with, and I see policy officials in the room. We work with support services, but also actors such as DCMS, Home Office, and National Cybersecurity Center to get the message across at this moment of time so we can intervene before these systems are out in the wild and potentially harmful to victims and survivors. And what we try to study is how gender-based abuse is changing and what role and impact IoT technologies, but also what risk trajectories there possibly could be when it comes to IoT systems. Now, we do that through workshops and trainings as well of the sector, and I highly encourage you, if you have a scheme that allows your employees to give free training to charities, do that with the domestic abuse sector. And also, we run a crypto party, which I'm so proud of, and I wish we could do that again, but we need to have the buy-in from technology vendors who actually give advice and support to victims and survivors. And so I want to share some of the insights that we've learned, just briefly, because I'm considerate of the time. One important aspect is that there's, as I said, positive and negative aspects to IoT. The most drastic reason why IoT could drastically change the tech abuse sector is the fact that neither the police nor the support services who work with victim survivors actually know what IoT is, nor what they do. So it's really important that we communicate more clearly what IoT and the transformation that IoT can generate, so they have it on the radar and also use it as an evidence in court cases. But the sad thing about this is we know for a fact that police services to this date often take 6 months to analyze simple devices such as smartphones and tablets or laptops. What will that mean if they have to analyze the video footage of a smart TV camera and the smart lock access requirements? How long will the prosecution then take? And I think that's something where this sector here could work with, for example, law enforcement and the support sector more clearly of how we could change that. And what I mean with the positive and negative aspect is, as I said, features that are being abused during the lifetime of a victim living with the perpetrator, but also so there's 3 stages: living with the perpetrator, trying to extract yourself from this abusive relationship, which is the highest risk period. That's where most homicides happen. And when you give advice at this moment of time to, for example, say to someone, oh, just change your passwords, but the perpetrator would be alerted to, for example, oh, she has found out that I have access to her smart TV camera, that could completely escalate things. Whereas in the 3rd stage, when they try to reset up their life, actually all the features that have been used against them are now positive. So that makes it, and I fully understand this for this sector here, really difficult to do design features that modify according to these stages. And we're currently trying to think about this, but I hope that this sector does and work around this too. So I want to end slowly by thinking about what does that mean for industry? And I'm really so thankful, John, for having this opportunity to be here today, because we've worked on this for the last 2 years, and I would say it was relatively hard to penetrate this sector. There was a lot of openness from, for example, support services, law enforcement policy, but I think it's still very difficult to talk about the risks and potential harm that the systems here provide. So let me end by saying a couple of pointers that might be helpful for you. One thing is, nothing works better for a victim and survivor to know, for example, what systems do. So prompts and notifications such as, do you know that the system has just requested access, or a new system has connected to your node? Do you want to give it access to that? Are so helpful. Also logs. There's a lot of disputes in courts around who has accessed what. So if it can be clearly determined for a victim, okay, he has accessed this on that date, then in a court case, it's so easy for them to make a case. Also, an IPv threat model. I know that in your mind, you're thinking about 2 threat actors. One is the external, but also the insider threat model. But the difference with a company is you have authority over that person. With an intimate partner violence situation, you should both have equal power, but that's not the case. So perhaps you want to think about, what would an IPv threat model even look like? Just food for thought here. Customer-facing staff guidance. One thing we have realized is once police or support services are unclear what to do with the systems, they send them back to you. So I have no clue if someone from Apple is here, but if you go to an Apple store and ask an Apple support worker, I'm not sure they're going to be trained to give me the advice I need at this moment of time. And I just told you about the risk that is by telling someone just to change their password. So have a think about, in your records of all the, for example, your phone services or your emails, have people ever contacted you about this, and what are you doing about that? And last but not least, data collection. As I said, we are really struggling to assess the scale of this. And perhaps you are some that sit on interesting data to evaluate what questions are arising and how could we as a collective community try to address that. And I really want to stress, perhaps one finding of or one outcome of today could be to think for the future of IoTSF about vulnerable groups. And I also want to state, and I'm sure it's not like the message you want to hear, technology will not solve it all. And the important message is there is no technical solution for inherently societal problems, as domestic abuse is the case. There might be plasters we can put on it, but I'm not sure it will revolutionize the system overall, because domestic abuse has haunted us for centuries. But just as a small food for thought. And last but not least, sorry I didn't catch that. What I mean with that is, this is reflected of my attempt to connect with many IoT vendors and talk about this. And the message I consistently receive is, we don't have a policy, so neither our policy team isn't allowed to speak to you, our security team isn't allowed to speak to you, and our DPO isn't allowed to speak to you. So perhaps you want to think of being more open about this, and also if researchers connect to you and try also in like closed environments to talk about like issues that we faced, to perhaps think about, should we have a policy about this? How are we dealing with someone approaching us about this topic? So I fully understand the responsibility is not lying purely in this room, and John told me not to point fingers, and I hope I didn't. I fully understand that this is something that is shared between industry, politics, and society. And I really invite you together with research, with industry, with policy, and societal actors such as charities to work on this topic. So I really hope we can start this journey today. I certainly am absolutely interested to talk to each and every one of you and hear your experience and your concerns. And if you have experience with victims and survivors approaching you, I'd love to hear. So I'm really thankful to have had the chance to talk to you about this. And if you're interested, try not to be silent around this, but get in touch with myself and my colleagues. And so thank you very, very much.